Good morning to you all and welcome. It's particularly nice to see the panelists here and so many of us joined. Thank you all for joining for what promises to be an interesting and insightful discussion around an important subject. How do LGBT plus people in the UK really feel about giving to charities? I'm Ian, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm partner and co-founder at Consider. For those of you who don't know Consider, we're a creative and strategy agency specialising in fundraising and the charity sector. For 20 years, we've helped charities to increase income, amplify their voices, and engage with both new and existing supporters. In tried and tested fashion, before we really get into things, a couple of the usual webinar housekeeping points. We're going to wrap up no later than midday to let you get on with your busy days. Please do use the chat function down there on Zoom to ask questions as we go. Send it to hosts and panelists. We'd love to have your thoughts. Those questions will be collated by Joe, who is here on the call somewhere, not panelist Joe, who you can see, another Joe. There's a lot of Joes at Consider. And we'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end. If you would like to ask your question anonymously, there is a Q&A function down there at the bottom bar in Zoom, and just make sure you tick anonymous. Finally, I'm sure you've all worked out, we're recording today's session. We'll email a recording of the webinar to you when we're all done, along with a copy of the full report. So, speaking of the report, this leads me rather nicely and neatly to the reason we're here this morning. Earlier this year, in the UK hit a major milestone, thanks to the findings of the 2021 census. For the first time in history, we have population data on the LGBT plus community, and it made for very interesting reading. 1.5 million people self-identified as being lesbian, gay or bisexual, and 262,000 self-identified as a gender that they weren't assigned at birth. What's more, due to the limitations of the census data, these figures are likely to be conservative. Now, that is a huge and growing demographic, right? We only have to look at the ever-increasing involvement of brands, both commercial and charity brands, to see this in Pride, to see this demographic already recognised in society. The size and significance of this demographic is also recognised in the welcome swing towards diversity, inclusion and equality in the way that organisations operate. Yet this is also an audience with considerable giving power. British LGBT plus people remain woefully under-researched. We only found a little out there focusing on the UK that helped identify and understand LGBT plus attitudes toward charities and what motivates them to give. So we initiated our own research based on a deep qualitative study of LGBT plus people from across the UK. The subsequent report provides you fundraisers and the sector with key sights into the LGBT plus community, giving you the tools to meaningfully engage with the LGBT plus audience. As I said, we're going to launch the report at the end of today's session for you to peruse to your heart's content. We genuinely hope you'll find the report and today's session useful, and that it helps deliver inclusivity as well as some quick wins into your fundraising programs, but also in time that it might help to inform part of your longer term fundraising strategies. Right, without further delay, let's get to the panel. As you've no doubt guessed, I'll be posing the questions and generally channeling my inner paxman, minus the aggression bit, to keep things moving and on track. But right now, I'm very pleased to introduce the panel who will be talking through some key themes from the report. A very big welcome to you all this morning. It's lovely to see you all. Can I ask you all to quickly introduce yourselves with your pronouns? Liz, should we start with you?
Happy to. Thanks, Ian. I'm Liz Tate. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm Director of Fundraising at Great Ormond Street Hospital Children's Charity. I've been at GOSH for almost 3 years, but I've been in the sector for 24 years. I'm particularly interested in the inclusivity of giving and participating and fundraising. I've recently become the exec level sponsor at GOSH Charity of our EDI strategy and sit on our EDI programme board. I'll leave it there for now. Do I hand back to you, Ian, or over to another panellist?
How about over to Jake?
Great.
Thank you, Ian and Liz, and Consider for the invite. So I'm Jake. I'm the head of individual giving and data at Stonewall. I've been at Stonewall for just under 2 years, and been in the sector for just over a decade. My pronouns are he, him. As you can imagine, working at Stonewall is, as a gay, queer, self-identified human being, I absolutely adore my job, and couldn't be closer to the cause in terms of what I do. The report that Consider have developed is absolutely amazing. I'm delighted to see something like this going out into the sector. I think it's going to be really useful. And as I said, I think it's a real privilege to be here. So thank you.
Thanks, Jake. Amy?
Hello, my name's Amy. My pronouns are they, them. I'm senior strategist at Consider, so I lead Consider's strategy team and have done for the last 4 years. LGBTQ representation and inclusion is a really deep interest of mine, both personally and also professionally. Before I joined Consider, I worked in the commercial sector where I co-chaired Egalite, which was Publicis Group's LGBT+ employee network. And I now lead my team to help reach and engage underrepresented audiences on behalf of our charity clients, but also our membership and education clients. I led on this research and insight for the project with the help of my brilliant strategy team and also Joe Nicholson, our other panelists from Consider.
That's a neat segue, thanks, Amy. Hi everybody, I'm Joe Nixon, so I'm head of copy at Consider, one of the lead creatives here. I've got many years experience in the charity sector as well, not just agency side, but also as a fundraiser. So I've kind of worn both hats and really understand the challenges that being a fundraiser involves, because I've been there myself. I've also been a trustee for National Homelessness Charity. So yeah, very much kind of fundraiser through and through. And like Amy, I have a real kind of professional but also personal interest in this topic. Really, really delighted that we can be having this discussion today and really excited to share the research. So yeah, we've got some good stuff coming up, I think.
We have indeed. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone. I feel very lucky to have you all here. Thank you for joining us and giving your time, expertise and opinion to this subject. I think I speak for us all on the call when I say I think we're all still learning here. So we don't expect any of you to have all of the answers. This session is not about individual charity policy. It's about how as a sector we can better represent and connect with an LGBT+ audience. And I suppose it's a chance for us to all learn from each other here. As Amy mentions, I'm now going to hand over to them who co-authored the report for a few minutes. They'll take you through some of the key themes and highlights just to give us all and the discussion a little bit of context. Ames, over to you for a moment.
Thank you very much. So, as Ian said, the report will be available after this session. And given how under-researched the audience is, there was so much we wanted to find out. And the report is packed full of juicy insight and useful learnings that I hope you'll all find really insightful. But for today's session, I'd like to take you through a couple of key questions and headlines from the report itself to frame our panel discussion. So during the research, we asked our participants a couple of key questions. Firstly, does the charity sector need to do anything differently when it's fundraising from LGBT+ audiences compared to straight audiences? And are there any non-LGBT specific charities who are meaningfully engaging and fundraising from the community? Sorry to ruin it for you, but there is a lot more nuance to this, of course, that you can find in the report. But I also don't think that this will come as a shock to many of us here. It's no good me telling you what I think we all kind of on this call probably already suspected, but instead, how can we as fundraisers, as marketeers, as communicators change this? I'm going to give you some food for thought before we open up to the panel discussion. So, whilst no one seems to be getting it right, what did come through loud and clear was the propensity to give to charities if they featured people like them. Visibility translates into generosity. But there's one big catch that most, if not all, non-LGBT charities seem to be falling into. And that is only engaging your LGBT+ audience, that is featuring them in marketing or communicating to them directly, during Pride season could actually do more harm than good. And that's because LGBT plus people are highly sensitive to the corporatisation of Pride and really cynical about it seeming like a cash grab, even for charities. Our participants told us that just doing it once a year screams tokenism to them, and everyone said it would make them less likely to donate. So, what can charities do? Well, firstly, LGBT plus people expect to see themselves represented all year round. And this could be implicit just by featuring them in your communications throughout the year. But actually even better is when you're explicit, when you tell the rich stories of your LGBT beneficiaries. But if you are doing this, they expect you to make the case as to why, to show that it's not tokenistic. Tell the people unique challenges LGBT plus people might face in relation to your cause, and most importantly, what your organisation has done to help broaden access or inclusion. For example, if you're a cancer care charity, what are the unique challenges a trans person might face that would stop them from approaching you for support? And also, what role did your charity play in resolving them? If you pull these together, you'll have the seed of a really, really powerful story there. There is, of course, a risk you take here, and that's one that everyone we spoke to acknowledged, and that's the potential for backlash. If you tell our stories and land up in a media storm of homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, participants told us that backing down is worse than not actually doing it in the first place. It says to the community that you're not willing to fight with them or for them, and this can come across as showing your organisation to just be in it for yourselves and cashing in on that so-called pink pound. They said, charities, be ready to face the backlash and to educate dissenters. You might risk losing a minority of donors, but you could potentially inspire more in the future. Another area we explored in our research was the meaning of a donation to this audience. So we found that having lived experience of a marginalised identity makes them sympathetic to others who are marginalised, even if that identity is different to their own. And they were keen to demonstrate their solidarity, particularly in response to hostile politics. A big finding was the role that direct to beneficiary giving plays in showing solidarity. Now, even if a problem doesn't get solved, for them, donating in this way shows to others that there is support out there. And the importance of standing in solidarity with others was often traced back to the spirit of the LGBT plus community's historic struggles, like the AIDS crisis. So pitching in as a community when no one else would help. And whilst there were differing views of exactly how much a community actually exists, each person we spoke to had played a really active role in supporting others in the community spaces that were important to them. I guess harnessing this community spirit and offering LGBT plus people a way to support your cause through solidarity with others could be a really powerful way to fundraise. We also explored different generations of LGBT plus people to understanding different attitudes to charity giving. The factors influencing different generations are so varied, and they have really clear implications for fundraisers as well. For instance, how has the explosion of that direct to beneficiary giving and crowdfunding shaped younger LGBT plus people's giving habits? How has the long shadow of Section 28 affected Gen X and millennials' paths to coming out? And how has that in turn shaped their families and the ways they support charities as a result? And what does living through decades of legal persecution mean for people with same gender partners when writing a will? People told us loud and clear that the community is not homogenous, and that communicating solely through pride and glitter in drag queens means that charities are missing vital opportunities to connect. But the good news is that there is so much opportunity to meaningfully connect with LGBT plus people of all ages and of all backgrounds. Thanks to the census and quantitative data, like from organisations like Stonewall, we know that the potential market for LGBT plus charity givers is huge and set to grow even more. Fundraisers, we need you to act now to gain their trust and support. As I said, There are lots and lots of ideas in our report, which I really urge you to read. But before that, I shall pass back to Ian to open our panel discussion, where we're going to be chatting through some of these topics as a group.
Amy, that was great. Thank you. Really insightful. Nice glimpse into the report. Right. So we've seen some of the headlines. Let's get stuck in. Let's start with the representation of LGBT plus people in fundraising. As Amy just highlighted, out of all the LGBT plus people we spoke to, nobody felt that non-LGBT plus charities were doing a good job of representing the community. But if charities represented the LGBT plus community and people better, they'd be able to build their donor base. So what's going on? Liz, I'm coming straight to you with this first meaty question. You're welcome. Why do you think LGBT plus people aren't being represented in charity marketing?
Ian, I think it's a really important question. I think for me, Amy, reading the report has been deeply thought-provoking, and I've been taking some time to consider this at our end. And I think it's probably different for every charity. And I can reflect, I think, probably on Great Ormond Street and the way in which we represent people and families. And a really key consideration for us, for any family, is that they feel safe sharing their child on social media, in the press. It's a really, really big thing to do anyway. And at Gosh, we only use real stories and real families. So we don't use any representations, any actors. And that then comes with its challenges, because understandably, it's can be a concern for LGBT plus families, because a child, when they're at Great Ormond Street, they're usually pretty vulnerable anyway, seriously ill. It can be a really difficult time. So it's a really big decision to share your child, put your family out there and share their story. And a hand on heart, I know with my own children that would, I would have some hesitation about putting them out there at a time when they're ill. And I think potentially for the LGBT plus community, that's then combined with a fear of backlash and a natural feeling that parents have to protect their child. So for us at Gosh Charity, our primary concern really is how do we protect families and not cause any unnecessary harm, which is something that we're looking at. We're also kind of starting to collect a baseline of data, because that will help inform us so that we know as a starting point. And we're then looking at how do we evolve the way in which we work with families so that we understand how well we represent LGBT plus families and children in our marketing. I think another angle for me, when I think about why there perhaps hasn't been the representation there needs to be across the sector, is that to be authentic, we need to have representation internally within our charities as a starting point. We have to make sure we are inclusive and diverse as charities and that will then impact how we show up to the world if we can achieve that. So at Great Ormond Street Charity, we've been focused on increasing our diversity and our representation. And over the last year, at our charity, the representation of LGBT plus colleagues has grown to 12% from 5% just a year ago. Now, that will be a shift in the people joining. It'll also be a shift in colleagues who feel comfortable declaring that information. So that's been a really important starting point for us. And we've been focusing on our inclusive language guides, because that is important when you're representing different diverse communities in the public domain too. The other thing that we are considering at Gosh Charity is our overall brand. We're in the midst of a really exciting brand review project, and the focus for that is how do we make sure that we have a brand for everyone, where everyone feels kind of included and able to support us. So hopefully what I've shared shows that we are trying at our charity and we are making progress, but we recognise we've still got a lot to do, and I'm sure other charities are in the same position that it's a journey and it takes real time and concerted effort. So they're just a few thoughts to kick us off potentially about why the sector might not be as advanced in this as it needs to be.
No, that's great. That's great. There are obviously barriers and charities will be struggling in this area. Jake, can I come to you? From your perspective, what can fundraisers and charity comms teams put in place to make sure LGBT plus representation actually happens?
Unfortunately, this answer has already been given by Amy and Liz, but I'm gonna reiterate some of the points and try and bring all of those strands together, because both Amy and Liz talked about two strands of work, and one is your workforce and having representation in your workforce, and the other is your external stakeholder groups, your fundraisers, your donors, the partners you work with, the beneficiaries of the organization as well. But representation in terms of your workforce doesn't stop at when you hire somebody. It's the culture you embed, and often culture is a set of words and values written on a piece of paper, and actually they should be a living representation of your organization. It should be organic, and you should feel that within your organization. And if you're going to embed LGBTQ plus representation in your fundraising and your comms, then you need to start by talking to the audiences that you want to represent. You need to, and Amy's already talked about this, but you need to have their stories in place. And this is something that Liz talked about in terms of the way GOSH works as well. We know, thanks to organizations like Stonewall's, we have family formation within LGBTQ plus families. Queer family formation is a thing, whether that's through IVF or adoption or fostering. We have families, we have children. But if you want to represent those families, you need to understand their stories, and whether you're talking to your colleagues within your workplace, whether it's your LGBTQ plus networks or the beneficiaries themselves, the people that you're supporting, you don't have authenticity, and you can't talk with authenticity and understand the intersections that will be playing out for LGBTQ plus representation. So I think those are a couple of really key points for me. It's about understanding your workforce and making sure that they're involved in from the ideation stage. This is from the ground up. This is about changing the culture. This isn't just about, it's Pride Month, we better use some LGBTQ plus voices, so let's talk to the workforce or get a case study or a beneficiary story. It's about using our voices authentically. And again, playing into what Amy said, is not tokenistic. We will see straight through rainbow washing. And we see rainbow washing is definitely something that happens in the corporate sector. And if you talk to a lot of people in the community, you'll see the way people react to especially Pride in London and the way that has become a corporate piece. Our lives exist outside of Pride and LGBT History Month. Our struggles are real and continue every day, and you'll only understand those if you're talking to us on a daily basis and understand what real life is like, because actually it isn't about a bunch of people walking through central London for a couple of hours, smiling and waving banners. It's about the fact that we may feel scared walking down the street. It may be the fact that we can't access IVF, or we can't access gender affirming healthcare. It's all of those nuances that go into creating a broad, rich story.
Thanks, Jake. You're starting to touch on almost like potential charity provision there. But as Amy pointed out earlier on, visibility equals generosity, and that can start from within the organisation as well, right? Set the ambition as you want to go on and broadcast your comms accordingly to supporters. Joe, do you have anything to add from an agency perspective? What do you think challenges are here concerning representation?
Yeah, there's absolutely loads I'd love to talk about there. So many great points raised. I think there's two things really. The first bit is just to really kind of echo back that how we move beyond tokenism and how we create proper representation. I think that, just to take Gosh as an example, it's realizing that the kind of LGBT plus community aren't this kind of group over there that's not involved in our charity, but actually the people who are just service users, and also people who might have distinct needs because of that, whether it's an LGBT plus family who has slightly different needs or sensitivities because of having children and the slightly, more challenges that might bring, but also, thinking about, say, a humanitarian charity that works with, say, migrants, that queer people internationally are much more likely to be forced to kind of leave home and to be displaced. So just recognizing those kind of real, it's not an add-on, it's not a tack-on, it's actually the kind of intrinsic reason why people might be service users, and also the staff and the supporters as well, that LGBT people, this could sound quite sinister, but we are everywhere. We are just part of the population, and that means really thinking through in a quite nuanced way about how we engage with charities. And I think from an agency perspective, finding those links is how we can tell the great stories. But just something else I kind of want to reflect on is that, I guess from my experience as a fundraiser from the other side, I think it's really easy for me to sit here as someone at an agency and say, well, charities aren't trying hard enough. But I know that's not the case. I know that in charities, there's a huge amount of willing. And often it's the kind of fundraising teams or marketing teams or comms teams who are trying really hard. But as individuals, there's a huge amount of pressure on you and on us to do that. And I just want to kind of recognize that we have all of these other challenges like budgets and income targets and capacity. We're all, a big problem in the sector right now is everyone's really stretched and worked off their feet. So how can you kind of make inclusion and representation happen in those contexts? Well, I guess the success stories I've seen, just take kind of a big medical research charity we work with as an example, is when representation is really embedded amongst all teams. And going back to that culture point that you raised, Jake, I think that's really, really key, that willingness to find those LGBT plus people who are engaging with the charity is a real priority for everyone, for services, for program staff, for your comms teams, for your fundraisers. And the best situations have been when I've been on the call as the agency partner with all of these stakeholders, and everyone in the room has been saying, okay, how can we find, what stories do we have of LGBT plus people? How can we tell those stories? It's a priority amongst everyone. And that's where it needs to be a kind of a load that's shared amongst everyone. I think that's how we're going to start changing the culture. But yeah, great. There's so much to think about here.
Yeah, there is. I really don't want to move us on. But Ames, do you have anything you want to come in on here before I do reluctantly move us on?
I could talk about this for hours, but I shall refrain from talking about it for hours. I guess the one thing I did want to pick up on, and you mentioned it earlier, Liz, is the data side of things. If you're not collecting the data, if you're not kind of doing the insight, and actually finding out what are those barriers to access that LGBT plus people are having, then you can't sort of adapt your programs with them in mind, which means you then won't have the case studies. So kind of going back to that, it has to be kind of embedded at the core of your organization. I think one of the things that we sometimes hear from clients that we work with is we know what works for our audience, and they will often have kind of their fundraising formulae kind of locked down and kind of say, well, actually, if we tell these case studies, then people will respond. But sometimes it's kind of, the existing audience, and if you haven't tried things and get things wrong and kind of put yourself out there, making yourself potentially sort of like vulnerable to backlash, then you're not going to have that data that you can kind of build up that rich picture with. So I think it's sort of a case of trying things and finding out and being informed by your beneficiaries, by your supporters, by your service users, to help you kind of pull all of that inclusion kind of into everything that you do.
Thanks. I think there's been a couple of points mentioned in the last couple of minutes, which lead us nicely onto our next point, and that is around dealing with backlash. And Josie's asked a question. I think that this might help this particular point might help with your question, Josie, around dealing with backlash, or more specifically, standing strong in the face of backlash. In our very online world, it can feel like backlash is inevitable. And when it comes to LGBT plus people, the backlash, I think, can be particularly fierce. Jake's alluded to that already, that whether that be social media pylons or donors threatening to stop their support. Yet the LGBT plus people we spoke to said they expected charities to stick to their guns. If you fold in the face of pressure, you risk losing their support for good. Jake, Stonewall has experienced navigated backlash and negative media coverage. We all know that this is a difficult area, but how can fundraising teams manage any backlash that they might experience as a result of LGBT plus representation?
It's really hard. If you're in, I think the first thing to probably say is, if you're in, you're all in. And that came out in the introduction that Amy so eloquently gave us earlier. Again, this goes back to, you've got to avoid tokenism at every stage. But inclusion is a journey, right? Change is a journey. And that's the one thing that, and change is a constant, that's the one thing that we can be certain of. And the only way that you're going to bring your internal audience and your external stakeholder audience along with you on that journey is through education. So this report in and of itself provides some of that data in terms of the representation of LGBTQ plus people in this country. So that starts to be built, it gives you something to start building that journey. And we've talked already about getting those beneficiary, those stakeholder stories as well. So you can start to articulate those stories into your kind of wider core audience. So they start to understand the rich diversity of the people that you support, or the people that you want to support in terms of actions. So education for me is probably the first point, and understanding that change is a journey that we all need to go on through education. And you are going to lose people. There is no doubt in my mind that you will lose people along the way, but if you are serious about this, you have to stick to it. And you have to be prepared for the backlash that you may face. But as Joe said, LGBTQ plus people are everywhere. We are here. We're members of your communities. We're members of your families. We are your friends. We are your colleagues. So why should we not be represented in what you're doing? And as I said, you have to commit. Allyship is not something that happens at one point in the year or for a month when you want to slap a rainbow on your logo. But again, it's about preparation, and it's about ensuring that your board, your senior leadership team are all bought into this commitment to wider representation. And it doesn't matter what minority group that you're building into your representation, it has to be authentic from the inside out. And I think there's one thing that I'd really want everybody on this call to bear in mind, that it's really easy to get caught up in the minority backlash, because it is a minority. They're very loud, but they are a minority, because the data, whether it's the census data, the data in this report, or Stonewall's Rainbow Britain report, all of that evidence tells us something very different. And actually, if your organization wants to be ahead of the curve in terms of acquisition and representing the UK, then you need to look at that data, because we're here, and younger people, the Gen Zers, not me, the Gen Zers have made their voices loud and clear. They've told us who they are, who they are. So you probably need to listen to that and then build from there.
We've got some good stuff coming up about Gen Z, and there's a bit in the report about that. As you know, Jake, that's really nicely put. Amy, what would you add here? What was your experience in the sector and beyond shown you?
Yeah, just want to jump on your very eloquent point, Jake, around that small but vocal minority. I think, you know, we're calling it backlash, let's call it transphobia. And I guess if you look at the data, YouGov sort of published a report last year that said actually 2/3 of Brits pay absolutely no attention to the trans rights debate. And actually over half of people who pay little attention to it do still think that trans people face major discrimination. So we do have, there are a lot of people out there that are feeling the same things that we're feeling. They're just not being vocal about it. And I think we can get sort of swayed away by that vocal minority. Obviously, they will still be vocal. But if we look at the kind of recent insight on Gen Z in particular, it's kind of echoed in our report. But there have been reports published recently that found that actually half of Gen Z engages in what they call inverse giving. So you know, when a big news story hits around transphobia, they'll actually give to trans positive charities and organisations in response to those negative headlines. So there is also a bit of an opportunity there. We can potentially draw a comparison between the sort of forced migrant debate and kind of refugee debate. Again, a vocal minority, very, very kind of anti the RNLI, rescuing people from the channel. The RNLI stood firm in the face of that criticism and actually gained a huge amount of support. As a result, I think it was something like a 2000% rise at one point in 2021. So I guess whilst the potential to lose money immediately I appreciate is very, very scary for fundraisers. What you can also do, and I guess this goes back to Jake's point, is actually see that longer term value of engaging a new donor base. And if you're committed to inclusion and standing strong with that community, you're likely to form stronger bonds with these people. And I guess, again, you can kind of look at the data, how many of those sort of dissenters are actually your committed longer term, potentially higher value givers in the first place, or are they just, you know, sitting online shouting a lot? And I guess the last thing I wanted to say, sort of in your question, Josie, about how you can kind of work with senior stakeholders is it was actually really moving to talk to the people that we spoke to for the report, and actually quite a few of them said, and I'm sort of not quoting verbatim here, but you know, people who have those identities, people who are marginalized, shouldn't be the ones that have to keep pushing for it and have to keep changing minds. Actually, that allyship, whether it's you know, you're a cis queer person or whether you're a straight cis het person, actually doing that allyship and doing that work internally and helping to push that agenda forward in the organisations that you work with or for is really, really important.
Thanks, Amy. Liz, can I bring you in at this point? How can charities turn backlash into a positive moment? So have you come across any examples of charities managing to do that?
Again, you know, I think there are limited examples, but the ones you see in the sector are particularly powerful. And I think personally that managing the backlash well can be a really important way of demonstrating a charity's kind of true commitment and authenticity in this space. And for me, it links to the kind of first area around representation, because we'll only be able to ensure that underrepresented communities feel safe in sharing their stories if they also know that we're going to have their back if there is any backlash or any negativity. So I do really think that the two are linked. And as Amy said, you know, I'm sure that managing backlash and standing firm against the vocal minority will help build support. And I think the RNLI example is a brilliant one. The other one that springs to mind for me is the National Trust. You know, they have stood firm in sharing their history linked to the slave trade, showing their commitment to LGBTQ+ inclusion, because they are purposefully positioning themselves as being open to everyone. And you saw it more recently during Pride Month, where a number of their properties, they were authentically sharing LGBTQ plus history. And that goes beyond the kind of the rainbow washing approach for me, and was a great way, you know, for them to celebrate their staff, their volunteers, their supporters, which, you know, are vast in their numbers. And that's all been in the face of criticism, people trying to infiltrate kind of their membership to impact voting. You know, there's been a lot of backlash that they've had to manage, and I really admire the way that they have maintained their position. And I haven't seen any data, but I would imagine that they are now have made themselves much more relevant to many other communities, to the younger generation as well. So they're one example. You know, I'm sure there are others, and there are some great examples of charities representing LGBT plus people. Another that comes to mind kind of through this workshop is Teenage Cancer Trust. You know, they know that they have a role to play with young people during their teenage years, where identity is really important, and they support young people through that journey, and they tell stories. And I think they've done that particularly well and without backlash, or not that I've seen. And I think that's important to say, that it doesn't always mean that there will be backlash. Actually, it could make you even more relevant to the people who need you the most.
Yeah. Okay, it feels to me like there's a consensus here amongst us, certainly the panel, that there's a collective responsibility among us as working in the sector to push back in the face of backlash, which is quite encouraging and paves the way for some sustained change. We have, however, established that that is difficult and that is not easy and requires effort. This one kind of feels like its own webinar in a way, and but I'm going to reluctantly again move us on to a final point I mentioned around engaging Gen Z. This is something that is again flagged in the report. A huge 47% of Gen Z today describe themselves as not being exclusively straight, and the numbers of out and proud LGBT plus people among younger generations is only going to grow. Well, that means in the future, LGBT plus inclusion is going to be something charities will simply have to do in order to connect with their audiences. Jake, how is Stonewall connecting with LGBT plus audiences? Are you managing it?
We are. We've got some ways to go, if I'm honest with you. We are not the experts in this space at all. And I think there's something about understanding how younger audiences want to engage, the platforms that they're on, the discussions they're having, and actually playing to what Amy said about the way that the nature of the giving as well, the nature of what's going to inspire somebody. And so my generation, X, I have a different relationship to Stonewall than a Gen Z person will. And so the way that the media in which I consume is different. But we have moved forward with that. So we are now, we've had an acquisition program running for years, and it was typical. Valex was doing all the things that it was meant to do, but attrition was really high. Because we realized actually that we were reaching the wrong audience, and it was the wrong proposition. So we've moved over to Handraiser as a digital mobilization piece. The acquisition program in terms of the volumes is still really high, it's really strong, but the retention has improved because so what we found is that we're reaching an audience that are taking kind of campaign-led action, who are a different demographic, but they're more engaged with the charity because they're signing something that they believe in. And what we found is that actually, because that audience is a slightly younger audience, they're more engaged with what we're, the kind of the trans rights stuff that Amy talked about earlier. And I've tried very hard to stay away from talking about trans rights at Stonewall for obvious reasons. So a lot of our program delivery as well is shaped by our audiences as well and their needs. So we do a lot of stuff around kind of program delivery for young people services as well. So we've got a couple of programs. One is called Young Futures, which is helping people get the young people from 16 to 24 get education, access to resources, support, and kind of early steps in their career. There's a new one that we're doing in partnership with TikTok, which is around young creative careers as well. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're doing, and just accessing audiences in different ways, like streaming, communities, and so on and so forth as well, and developing new products around that. The one thing I would say to anyone moving into that space is don't get a Gen Xer to develop program activations for Gen Zers. It doesn't work. Make sure that you've got the right people in your fundraising and your comms team to do that. So we are doing it. In answer to your question, we are doing it, but there's more work to be done.
Okay. Have you explored the idea of donating in solidarity at all?
Yeah, absolutely. The Handraiser pilot,
Yeah.
I say pilot, it's a fully fledged acquisition program now. That's definitely a donation in solidarity piece, and we are now testing that out with direct to donate asks on Facebook. We are also testing that based on programmatic or thematic work as well. So Joe mentioned refugees, for example. One of our most successful monthly email campaigns in the last couple of months actually has been around that particular program of work. So we know that the framing of donating in solidarity works, but it's ensuring that you've got an authentic message, a case study. It's obviously, I'm talking to preaching to the choir here, but ensuring you have the right case study, the right program of work, the case for support, and then testing that as you go. And we have found that, yeah, people will donate in solidarity if you've got the right thing. But we're also seeing, as Amy said, that inverse giving, that reactive giving. If there's a big news story, our donation pages just shoot through the roof for 24, 48 hours.
Okay. Joe, did you have a point to add around giving in solidarity or direct to beneficiary crowdfunding giving?
Yeah, I think it's just something that's come out really strongly in our report, and really have to kind of get into the report later to really get into the depth of that. But I think we found, especially with those younger kind of audiences, that direct to beneficiary giving, which sounds a bit technical, we mean kind of GoFundMes or kind of crowdfunders, really, really popular. And that didn't really come as a surprise. And that it's not limited to this, but it can start with things like fundraisers for kind of gender affirming healthcare. And I think, well, what we found from speaking to participants was that what's really drawing people to that way of giving is the idea that you can you feel like you have that real connection to the person you're supporting, and you can hear from that beneficiary. And even terms like beneficiary are really kind of out of date when we're talking about this kind of giving, because it's someone who you care about and you empathize with, and you give as a way to support them and show them that they're not alone. People probably are using GoFundMe because they can't access funds or fundraise in any other traditional ways. There's a sense of it being more kind of grassroots, which is really exciting. And there's also this idea that you can kind of express your solidarity through direct messages as well, and direct communication with the people you're giving to. Saying all of that, I'm just very aware how hard it would be for kind of established charities, large charities, to take on that form of grassroots giving, and even question whether it's right to kind of eat up that kind of way of supporting people. But I think there's a lot we can learn, and I'll be really interested from a kind of insight perspective to see how over the next kind of 20 years, giving habits change, whether this is something that Gen Z are doing now, or whether this is just going to be how charity works in the next few decades. It's really, don't have any answers to that, but some really key themes kind of emerge in our research. So I encourage you to kind of, read the report and dig a bit deeper onto that.
Thanks, Joe. Liz, can I just come to you here? How do you think the charity sector can connect with underrepresented audiences? Now, that might be different generations or other demographics, but have you seen anything that's really worked?
Another great question, and I have to admit I've been particularly struck by the insights in the report, and I encourage everyone to read it. And in particular, the insights around direct to beneficiary giving and the desire to support marginalised communities. And although working in the context of the NHS, that's not necessarily kind of a route that's open to us. What we do have at GOSH is the ability to look really purposefully at how we offer tangible ways to give and create connections. And part of the context at GOSH, something that's always worked well for us in our fundraising mix, is the tangibility of capital appeals. Now, we're running our biggest appeal ever at the moment, which is for the mighty sum of £300 million for a new children's cancer centre. So we know to deliver that scale of ambition, we need to be inclusive to all. And I'm struck by kind of one of the questions in the Q&A about how you convince senior leaders to represent the community. And my question more is, well, what if you don't actually? If we don't take steps to make giving more inclusive, how can you ever kind of achieve your ambitions, particularly when you've got a big goal like we do at GOSH? And so, like Jake, actually, one of the income streams that we're focusing on, we see a lot of opportunity in, is streaming. So that's a programme that's rapidly developing at Great Ormond Street. We have a fantastic lead for this area called Ben, who's from the LGBT community. He is running a campaign later this year called Stream It, Build It, Beat It, where he'll be focused on the community and bringing people together to fundraise for something really tangible. So we're really excited to discover what that will do for us. But we know that that's one initiative, and our portfolio, like other large charities, is really broad. So on the other end of the spectrum, we raise a lot of money through volunteers and boards and committees, kind of your more traditional ways of supporting from a high value fundraising perspective. So we have been looking at how do we increase the diversity of our boards and committees. We've set ourselves an ambition to have the most diverse appeal board that we've ever had for this particular appeal. And then another opportunity we're particularly interested in is the potential for engaging LGBT plus people as part of our legacy marketing. So next year we're looking to develop a new legacy proposition, and we will be looking specifically at how we talk to the new generation of child-free supporters. So I talk to my team, and again, I've got brilliant colleagues who understand our legacy giving well, and they believe that a proportion of our legacies today do come from the community, as they probably do for many charities where there are large estates to give and no dependents. So that's something we'll be exploring. But it is also for me about all the different diverse communities that could support us. As I say, we need to be inclusive to all. We've made great progress over the last 2 years focusing on Islamic giving as a completely different example. We put focus, energy, time into authentically being able to fundraise with and from the Islamic community, and that program's now flying, particularly from a philanthropy perspective. And I'm really keen that we apply that same energy and thinking to explore different underrepresented audiences. The challenge for us is, in what order do we do that? Because it's difficult to do it all at once. But when I have read the report and thinking about this topic in particular, I'm really keen to understand the lived experience of people from different communities when it comes to supporting our charity, taking part in our events, volunteering for us, and importantly, telling their stories and being featured in a marketing. And I think starting with that and understanding what it's really like will help us to develop a really clear action plan. So that's a key takeaway for me, and I hope that others across the sector can take that kind of very clear action away to think about how does it apply across the fundraising portfolio and what action could be taken. So I'll probably stop there, because again, could talk about this all day, and I know we're running out of time. Sorry.
Yeah, I knew this would happen. I knew we'd have loads to say. Yeah, we are indeed running out of time. Thank you I think we should probably move on to some questions from the audience. Thank you very much to everyone who has asked a question, either on the chat or through the Q&A feature. I'm going to pick a couple to get started. Josie, I think we probably answered that question when we were chatting about the backlash point. And again, there was a question here about specifically for LGBT plus specific charities, how can we better mobilize the community for fundraising? I'd like to think we spoke a little bit about that when Jake was discussing the hand-raising Facebook hand-raising solidarity campaign. Liz, there is a point here about a nice question, recognition of your paid internship scheme. Wondered, broadening that out, how do we encourage other charities to bring in similar schemes so we can help more bring in more LGBT plus fundraisers into the sector? Do you have a brief answer for that?
Well, it's something we're still learning about. We're on the second iteration now of our internship programme, and I know the word journey has been used a few times today, so it is a journey. I hope that by having that very clear commitment to an internship programme that's inclusive, the other charities will follow suit. You know, it's well documented, particularly at the moment, how hard charities find it to recruit brilliant fundraisers. We don't have enough people coming through the system, so we've all got a responsibility, I think, to recruit and develop the talent of the future. Now, that can be hard at the moment in tough times when budgets are stretched, but again, I come back to the point, well, what if we don't? If we don't do it, we're going to be poorer as a sector, and we won't be able to realise the opportunities open to us, and importantly, won't be able to help the people or the animals that need us.
True enough. I've failed in keeping my promise to wrap us up at 11:59. It's midday. Rachel from MS Society, thank you. That was a really, really good question. Reluctantly, Joe, Amy, do you have an answer for that in a couple of seconds, or maybe even Jake?
I have a very quick answer to that, and also to Ruth's question around how do you get the stories and how do you represent people. I think you'll find some stuff in our report, Rachel, around how do you tell those authentic stories. I think just ask people for their experiences, and they might be negative, they might be positive, but hopefully you will get those stories from people. I think using your social channels and just doing a call out could be one way of doing it, and sort of getting in touch with, you know, the people on the ground in those teams who are engaging with service users and or beneficiaries every day to gather those stories. That was not as quick as I would have liked, but hopefully that.
Sorry to put the pressure on. That really is all we have time for. A massive thank you to you all in the panel for an insightful and valuable discussion. There was way more than we could ever have discussed to talk through today, I have to say. A big thank you to everyone present. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for taking the time to join this important conversation. Finally, we'll send you all a PDF of the full report shortly for you to read, share, hopefully influence your fundraising, along, of course, with a recording of today's session. Any other questions, just drop me a line. And if there are any other questions here in the chat that came up, we will do our best to reply to you with answers to those. Thank you again to our wonderful panel, and thanks very much for joining us. See you next time.